I'm Jake Matthews, a critical care registered nurse who worked the night shift at St. Catherine's Medical Center in Springfield, Illinois for 7 years. I had my CCRN certification, specialized in cardiac care, and had seen more than my share of code blues, trauma cases, and situations that would make most people never want to set foot in a hospital again. But here's the thing about working ICU. You develop a kind of armor. You learn to compartmentalize. You master the dance between empathy and clinical detachment, because if you don't, the weight of what you witness will crush you. I was good at my job, really good. My badge read Senior Critical Care RN, and I mentored newer nurses through their first death, their first failed resuscitations, their first moments of doubt. I'm telling you this so you understand. I wasn't some wide-eyed rookie who spooked easily. I'd pronounced dozens of patients dead. I'd held the hands of people as they took their last breaths. I'd performed CPR until my arms felt like they'd fall off. Nothing in that hospital could rattle me. Or at least that's what I believed until March 14th, 2024. That was the night I learned that sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't death itself. It's what happens when death doesn't follow the rules. The shift started like any other Thursday night. I clocked in at 7 p.m., got report from the day shift nurse, and took my assignment. 4 patients in the cardiac wing, rooms 8, 10, 12, and 14. Standard post-surgical recoveries, a CHF exacerbation, nothing complicated. The kind of night where you might actually get to sit down and chart without being interrupted every 5 minutes. My charge nurse that night was Linda Chen, a 20-year veteran who'd seen everything twice. She was reviewing the assignments when one of the ER nurses, Marcus, wheeled in a new admit around 8:30 p.m. I grabbed the chart and scanned it while Marcus gave me report. The patient's name was David Foster, 62 years old, anterior wall STEMI. They'd gotten him to the cath lab within an hour of symptom onset, the golden window. 2 stents placed, good blood flow restored. His vitals looked solid. BP 118/76, heart rate 72, and regular oxygen saturation 98% on 2 liters. He's been pretty quiet, Marcus said as we wheeled him into room 6. Wife's in the waiting room. Said she'll come back up after she makes some calls. David was awake but groggy from the sedation. He looked at me with those post-procedure eyes, confused, exhausted, scared. I'd seen that look 1,000 times. Mr. Foster, I'm Jake. I'll be your nurse tonight, I said, starting my assessment. You're in the ICU. You just had a procedure to open up some blockages in your heart. Everything went well. How are you feeling? Tired, he mumbled. Really tired. That's normal. I'm going to get you set up here, check all your numbers, and then you can rest. Your wife will be able to visit in about an hour during visiting hours. I went through my routine, hooked him up to the cardiac monitor, placed the pulse ox on his finger, verified his IV lines, checked his femoral access site for bleeding. Everything was textbook. His rhythm on the monitor was beautiful. Normal sinus, no ectopy, QRS complexes looked perfect. I documented everything in the electronic chart, set my alarms, and moved on to check my other patients. Room 8 needed pain medication. Room 10's EV pump was beeping. Room 12 wanted ice chips. The normal chaos of night shift ICU. Around 10:15 p.m., I was charting at the nurse's station when David's cardiac monitor alarm went off. Not the urgent, continuous alarm that means someone's crashing, just a single alert tone. I glanced at the monitor bank on the wall. His heart rate had dropped to 58. Bradycardia, but not critical. Could be vagal response, could be the medications. I got up to assess him. Room 6 was at the end of the hallway, separated from the main unit by a set of double doors because it was technically our isolation room, though we used it for overflow when we were busy. I pushed through the doors and walked in. David was lying exactly as I'd left him, eyes closed, breathing evenly. The monitor above his bed showed the same thing. Heart rate 58, blood pressure stable, oxygen saturation 98%. Nothing concerning. Mr. Foster, I said softly, how are you feeling? He didn't respond. I watched his chest rise and fall, deep, regular breaths. He was asleep. I checked his pulses, his IV sites, his surgical access point. Everything looked good. The bradycardia was likely just a normal variation as his body relaxed. I made a note in his chart and headed back to the nurse's station. 20 minutes later, the alarm went off again. This time, his heart rate read 52. I frowned at the monitor. That was getting borderline, especially for a fresh MI patient. I grabbed my stethoscope and headed back to room 6. David was in the same position, still breathing steadily. But when I put my stethoscope to his chest, his heart rate sounded fine. Definitely faster than 52. I counted manually for a full minute, 68 beats per minute. I looked up at the monitor. It still read 52. Okay, that's weird, I muttered. I checked the lead placement on his chest. All 5 electrodes were stuck firmly in place. I swapped out the cable connecting him to the monitor, thinking maybe there was a short in the wire. The monitor flickered, recalibrated, and then displayed heart rate 68. There we go, I said. Equipment malfunction. Happened all the time. I made a note to have biomedical engineering check that monitor in the morning. I was halfway back to the nurse's station when I heard something that made me stop cold. A voice, male, speaking clearly. It was coming from room 6. I spun around and pushed back through the doors. David was still in bed, still in the same position, eyes still closed, but I had definitely heard someone talking. "Mr. Foster," I said louder. "Are you awake?" No response. I stood there for a moment, listening. The only sounds were the soft beeping of the monitor, the gentle hiss of the oxygen, and the usual ambient noise of the ICU. Distant alarms, people talking at the nurse's station, footsteps in the hallway. I must have heard someone in the hallway, I told myself. Sound carried strangely in hospitals at night. I checked David one more time, confirmed he was stable, and left. At 11:30 p.m., his wife Janet came to visit. I led her into room 6 and gave her the update. Everything looked good. He was resting comfortably. The procedure had gone well. She sat in the chair next to his bed and held his hand while he slept. I was back at the nurse's station when Linda walked over with a cup of coffee. "How's the new admit?" she asked. "Stable. Monitor's acting up a little, but vitals are solid." She nodded. "Probably just needs new leads. Those things get gunked up with gel." We chatted for a few minutes about staffing issues, about how the hospital was trying to increase our patient ratios again, about her daughter's college applications. Normal night shift conversation. At 11:55 p.m., Janet came out of room 6. "He's awake," she said. "He wants to talk to you." I followed her back into the room. David's eyes were open now, tracking us as we approached. His monitor still showed stable vitals. Heart rate 70, blood pressure 100 to 22 over 78, oxygen 97%. "Hey, Mr. Foster," I said. "How are you feeling?" He looked at me for a long moment, and something about his expression made my skin prickle. His eyes were clear, too clear for someone who should still be groggy from sedation. "Who's the man in the corner?" he asked. I felt my stomach drop. "What man?" "The man in the blue scrubs. He's been standing there all night." David pointed to the far corner of the room behind me. I turned slowly. The corner was empty, just bare wall and a crash cart. "Mr. Foster, there's no one there," I said gently. "You might be having some confusion from the medications." "I'm not confused," he said, his voice steady. "He's right there. He's been watching me." Janet squeezed his hand. "Honey, you're just tired." "He's wearing a name tag," David continued, "but I can't read it." The letters keep moving. A chill ran down my spine. Hallucinations weren't uncommon post-procedure, especially with the sedation medications and the stress of a cardiac event. But there was something about the way David was describing this. Specific details, clear speech. No other signs of confusion. "Mr. Foster, what's your full name?" I asked. "David Allen Foster." "What year is it?" 2024. "Where are you?" "St. Catherine's Medical Center, Springfield, ICU." He answered every orientation question perfectly, never taking his eyes off the empty corner. "He's still there, Jake." "He hasn't moved." I checked his pupils, equal and reactive. I ran through a quick neuro assessment. Everything was normal. His monitor showed no changes, blood pressure stable, heart rhythm perfect. The man in blue, I said carefully. What's he doing? Just standing there, watching. He looked sad. Janet's face had gone pale. Jake, what's happening? It's okay, I said, trying to keep my voice calm and professional. Mr. Foster, I'm going to call the doctor, just to let him know you're having some visual disturbances. It's probably just a reaction to the medication. We might adjust. He's walking towards you, David said. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to turn around. David, there's no one there, Janet said, her voice shaking now. He's right behind Jake now. David's eyes followed something I couldn't see, tracking it as it apparently moved across the room. He's trying to tell me something. What's he saying? I asked, immediately regretting the question. I was feeding into this. I was making it worse. But I couldn't stop myself. David's expression changed. The clarity in his eyes dimmed, replaced by something that looked like fear. He says I'm not supposed to be here yet, David whispered. He says there was a mistake. The monitor alarm went off. I looked up. David's heart rate had spiked to 145. His blood pressure was climbing. 168/94. Mr. Foster, I need you to take some deep breaths for me, I said, snapping back into nurse mode. You're getting worked up, and that's not good for your heart. But he wasn't listening. His eyes were still locked on something behind me, wide with terror now. He's touching the monitor, David said. He's touching your equipment. The overhead lights flickered. Then the cardiac monitor went black. Complete power failure. The screen was dead, blank, showing nothing. But I could still hear it. The speakers were still working, still broadcasting the sound of David's heartbeat. Fast and irregular now. Shit, I muttered, reaching for my stethoscope. Power failures happened. Backup batteries kicked in. This was fine. The monitor screen flickered back to life, but the rhythm showing on the screen wasn't David's rhythm anymore. It was asystole, flatline, no electrical activity, the universal symbol for cardiac death. But the audio was still playing his heartbeat, fast and irregular, but definitely beating. I stared at the screen, my brain trying to process what I was seeing. The monitor was showing a dead patient, but the sound was telling me his heart was working. And when I looked at David, he was clearly alive, breathing rapidly, eyes wide, talking. Jake, Janet said. Jake, what's wrong with the machine? I started to say. Then David's eyes rolled back in his head. His body went rigid, back arching off the bed. Textbook seizure. I hit the code button on the wall and yelled for Linda. She burst through the doors within seconds, took one look at the situation, and grabbed the crash cart. What happened? She demanded. Seizure activity started about 5 seconds ago, I said, checking my watch to time it. Monitor's malfunctioning, showing asystole, but he's got pulses. Linda looked at the monitor, then at David, then back at the monitor. Her expression mirrored my confusion. The seizure lasted 43 seconds. Then David's body relaxed, and he slumped back onto the bed. His eyes were closed. He was breathing. I checked his carotid pulse, strong and regular. Maybe 80 beats per minute. The monitor still showed a flat line. Get another monitor in here, Linda said. Now! I ran out to the supply room and wheeled in our backup unit. We disconnected David from the malfunctioning monitor and hooked him up to the new one. Normal sinus rhythm, heart rate 82, blood pressure 134/86, oxygen saturation 96%. Everything was fine, or at least everything the machines could measure was fine. Janet was crying now, clutching David's hand. What's happening to him? Why did he have a seizure? I don't know, I admitted, but his vitals are stable now. I'm going to call Dr. Peterson and let him know what happened. I stepped out into the hallway and pulled out my phone. Dr. Peterson was the cardiologist on call, a methodical man in his 50s who didn't get rattled easily. I explained the situation, the hallucinations, the agitation, the seizure, the monitor malfunction. Any history of seizures, he asked. No, chart's clean. Head CT? Not ordered yet. Should I call neurology? Yes, get a CT, full neuro consult, and check his labs, especially his electrolytes. Could be a medication reaction, could be a small stroke we missed. Keep him on continuous monitoring and let me know if anything changes. Will do. I hung up and went back to check on David. He was awake again, looking around the room with confusion. "What happened?" he asked groggily. "You had a brief seizure, Mr. Foster," I said. "We're going to run some tests to figure out why. How do you feel now?" "Tired. Confused." He paused. "Where did he go?" My blood went cold. "Where did who go?" "The man in blue. He was here and then—" David's eyes went distant. He touched my chest, right before everything went dark. Janet made a small sound in her throat. "Mr. Foster, do you remember what else the man said to you?" I asked, not sure why I was pursuing this line of questioning. David looked at me, and for just a moment, his expression was completely lucid, completely rational, like he was about to tell me something important. "He said his name was Thomas. He said he died in this room 3 months ago." David's voice was steady, matter of fact. "He said they didn't code him fast enough. He said he waited alone." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Linda was standing in the doorway. I saw her face go pale. "Jake," she said quietly, "can I talk to you outside?" I followed her into the hallway. She pulled me away from the door, out of earshot from room 6. "We did have a patient named Thomas in that room," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thomas Brennan, 67-year-old male, cardiac arrest. It was December 11th. Did he?" I couldn't finish the question. "He coded at 3 a.m. I was charge nurse that night. We were short-staffed, and his nurse was dealing with another patient crashing in room 10. By the time we got to him," she shook her head, "he'd been down for at least 15 minutes. Too long." My mouth had gone dry. David couldn't have known that. There's no way. "I know." We stood there in silence for a moment, both of us trying to process what this meant, trying to find a rational explanation. "It has to be a coincidence," I said finally. "Maybe he overheard something. Maybe another patient mentioned it, or a family member, or—" "Jake, David was admitted through the ER at 6 p.m. and went straight to the cath lab. He's been unconscious or in room 6 ever since. When would he have heard anything about Thomas?" She was right. There was no logical way David could have known that information. "What do we do?" I asked. Linda looked back toward room 6. "We do our jobs. We monitor him, we run the tests, we follow the doctor's orders. And we don't talk about this. But I mean it, Jake. You document the seizure. You document the hallucinations as visual disturbances, possible medication reaction. You don't write anything about Thomas Brennan in that chart. Understood?" I nodded, but my mind was racing. Something was very wrong here, and pretending it wasn't happening didn't seem like the right approach. I went back into room 6. David had drifted off to sleep again, his breathing regular, his monitors showing perfect rhythms. Janet sat beside him, looking exhausted and scared. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked. "We're going to do everything we can," I said. It was the only honest answer I could give. I spent the next hour arranging David's tests, calling neurology, checking on my other patients. Every time I walked past room 6, I found myself glancing through the window, half expecting to see someone standing in the corner. At 1:30 a.m., the transport team came to take David down for his CT scan. I gave them report and watched as they wheeled him out of the room. The moment he was gone, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I went to the nurse's station computer and pulled up Thomas Brennan's old chart. Thomas Allen Brennan, December 11th, 2023, admitted for chest pain, had a massive MI on the cardiac floor, transferred to ICU room 6. Coded at 2:47 a.m. I read through the code documentation. It was sparse, clinical, the kind of chart note you write when something goes wrong and you're trying to cover all your bases. 0247, patient found unresponsive, no pulse, no respirations, code blue called, CPR initiated, time down estimated 12 to 15 minutes prior to discovery. 15 minutes. That was an eternity in a code situation. After that long without oxygen, even if they'd gotten him back, the brain damage would have been catastrophic. They'd worked him for 43 minutes before calling it. Time of death, 3:30 a.m. The nurse who documented it was someone named Sarah Mitchell. I didn't recognize the name. She must have left before I started on night shift. I scrolled through the rest of his chart, looking for something, anything, that might explain what was happening. But it was just a standard code, a standard death. Sad, but not unusual. I was about to close the chart when something caught my eye. At the very bottom, there was an incident report attached. I clicked on it. Patient expired after code blue. Of note, cardiac monitor in room 6 malfunctioned during code, displaying a systole for approximately 3 minutes before functioning properly resumed. Biomedical engineering notified. Equipment tagged for inspection. My hands started shaking. The same malfunction. The exact same malfunction that had just happened with David. I looked up the biomedical engineering report. They'd tested the monitor extensively, replaced components, run diagnostics. Their conclusion, no defect found. Equipment functioning within normal parameters. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. This wasn't possible. None of this was possible. But it was happening. Linda walked by and saw me at the computer. She glanced at the screen, saw Thomas's chart, and gave me a look that was equal parts warning and understanding. "Jake," she said softly, "don't." "Linda, the monitor." "I know. I read the incident report back when it happened." She sat down next to me. "You think I haven't thought about it? You think I haven't wondered? Then why aren't we talking about it? Because what are we supposed to say?" Her voice was tired. "That the room is haunted? That dead patients' spirits are interfering with our equipment? We'd sound insane. But if it's happening, there's nothing we can do about it." She stood up. "David's going to be back from CT in 20 minutes. Focus on him. Focus on the living." She walked away, leaving me alone with Thomas Brennan's chart still open on my screen. I closed it and went back to work. David returned from CT at 2:15 a.m. The transport team wheeled him back into room 6, and I got him reconnected to all his monitors. The neurologist would read the scan in the morning, but the tech said it looked clean. No obvious bleeds or strokes. "How are you feeling, Mr. Foster?" I asked. "Better," he said. "Tired, but better." "Did you see him?" I froze. "See who?" "The man in blue." "Thomas. He was in the CT scanner room. He followed us down there." David said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather. "He's worried about you." "Worried about me?" "He says you're going to see more. He says it's not just him." David looked at me with those two clear eyes. "He says room 6 remembers all of them." I felt like someone had dumped ice water down my back. "Mr. Foster, you need to rest," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've been through a lot tonight." "I'm not crazy, Jake. And I don't think you think I am either." He paused. "You looked him up, didn't you? You checked to see if there really was a Thomas who died here." I didn't answer. I couldn't. "He showed me," David continued, "when he touched my chest. I saw it. I saw him dying in this room, the monitor showing that flat line, and everyone working on him. But it was too late. He was already gone, and he was confused and scared and alone." Janet had tears running down her face. "David, please stop." "I'm sorry, honey, but he needs to know. Someone needs to know." David looked back at me. "There are others, Jake. He's not the only one who stayed behind. This room, something about this room keeps them here." "That's enough," I said, more sharply than I intended. "Mr. Foster, you've had a cardiac event, you've had sedation medications, and you've had a seizure. Your brain is trying to process trauma, and sometimes that creates vivid hallucinations. That's all this is." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. David just looked at me sadly. "You'll see," he said. "Before your shift ends, you'll see." I left the room and stood in the hallway, trying to get my breathing under control. This was insane. I was a trained medical professional. I didn't believe in ghosts. I didn't believe in haunted hospital rooms. But I couldn't explain the monitor malfunction. I couldn't explain how David knew about Thomas. I couldn't explain the voice I'd heard, or the cold spots, or the feeling that something was very, very wrong with room 6. At 3:15 a.m., I was checking on my patient in room 8 when I heard screaming. It was coming from room 6. I ran down the hallway, my heart in my throat. Linda was right behind me. We burst through the doors. David was sitting up in bed, pointing at the corner. The same corner he'd pointed to before. But this time, Janet was pointing too. "There's someone there," she was saying, her voice high and terrified. "Oh my God! There's someone standing there!" I looked at the corner. It was empty, but the temperature in the room had dropped so dramatically I could see my breath misting in the air, and the cardiac monitor was showing a flat line again. But David's heart was beating. I could see his chest rising and falling, could see his carotid pulse fluttering in his neck. "Everyone out," I said. "Now." "But," Janet started. "Now." Linda helped me get both David and Janet out of room 6 and into the hallway. I grabbed a portable monitor and hooked David up. His vitals were stable. Perfect, even. "What's happening?" Janet demanded. "What the hell is going on in that room?" I didn't have an answer. Linda pulled out her radio. "This is Linda Chen. I need the nursing supervisor to the ICU immediately. We have a situation with room 6. While we waited, I grabbed a thermometer from the supply cart and walked back toward room 6. The temperature in the hallway was normal, 72 degrees. But when I stood at the threshold of the room, the thermometer read 54 degrees, 20 degrees colder, in a span of 5 feet. That wasn't possible. That wasn't scientifically possible. I stepped into the room, and the cold hit me like a physical force. The kind of cold that sinks into your bones, that makes your joints ache. The kind of cold that feels wrong. The monitor in the room was still showing a flat line. I walked over to it and unplugged it from the wall. The screen stayed on. That was impossible. These monitors had backup batteries, but they shouldn't run with no power source at all. And yet here it was, unplugged, displaying that horrible flat line. I stared at it for a long moment. Then, feeling ridiculous but unable to stop myself, I spoke to the empty room. "Thomas, is that you?" Nothing happened. "If you're here, if you're trying to communicate something, I'm listening." The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. I could see frost forming on the metal bed rails. And then from somewhere behind me, I heard it again. That voice, male, clear, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. I spun around. The corner wasn't empty anymore. I can't tell you what I saw. My brain won't let me remember it clearly, like it's protecting me from something I'm not supposed to know. But I saw a shape, a figure, something that might have been a person once, and I felt it looking at me. The monitor behind me started beeping. Not the alarm sound, the regular beep of a functioning cardiac monitor. I turned to look at it. The flat line was gone. In its place was a normal sinus rhythm, heart rate 72, but there was no one connected to the monitor. The leads were just hanging loose, attached to nothing. When I looked back at the corner, the figure was gone, but written in the frost on the bed rails, in letters that looked like they'd been traced by a finger, were 3 words, "Not just me." I got out of that room so fast I almost tripped over my own feet. The nursing supervisor, a woman named Carol who'd been with St. Catherine's for 30 years, arrived 10 minutes later. I tried to explain what had happened, but I knew how it sounded. Equipment malfunctions, temperature fluctuations, a stressed patient having hallucinations. "We're moving Mr. Foster to room 10, Carol said after inspecting room 6. "I'll have biomedical come check all the equipment in here. And Jake, I think you should take your break." It wasn't a suggestion. I went to the break room and sat in the dark, drinking coffee I didn't taste, trying to process what I'd experienced. I'd seen something I couldn't explain, something that shouldn't exist. And if David was right, if Thomas wasn't alone, then how many others were there? How many patients had died in room 6 over the years? How many were still there, confused and scared and trying to be seen? I pulled out my phone and did something I swore I'd never do. I Googled St. Catherine's Medical Center haunted. The results made my blood run cold. There were forums, stories, other nurses, other staff members, all talking about room 6, about equipment that malfunctioned, about voices heard when no one was there, about patients who reported seeing people in blue scrubs who disappeared when you looked directly at them. One post from someone claiming to be a former respiratory therapist talked about responding to a code in room 6 and seeing at least 5 figures standing in the corner, watching us work. Another post from a housekeeper described cleaning room 6 and finding the bed rails covered in frost, even though it was the middle of July. How had I never heard about this? How had no one told me? I knew the answer, of course, because if you talked about it, people thought you were crazy, because hospitals ran on science and protocol, not ghost stories, because acknowledging it meant acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, death wasn't as final as we wanted to believe. I went back to the ICU at 4:30 a.m. David was settled in room 10, stable and sleeping. Janet had gone home, exhausted. The temperature in room 6 had returned to normal. The monitors were functioning properly. Everything looked fine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still there, watching, waiting. Linda found me standing outside room 6, staring through the window at the empty bed. "You're going to request a transfer, aren't you?" she asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Linda, how long have you known about this?" She sighed. "Since my second year on night shift. I had a patient code in there, and while we were working her, I saw something. I convinced myself it was stress, exhaustion, too many double shifts, but then it happened again and again. Different patients, different situations, but always room 6. Why didn't you tell anyone?" I told my supervisor. You know what she said? She said I needed to take some vacation time, maybe talk to employee health about stress management. Linda looked at me. "No one wants to hear it, Jake. No one wants to believe it, so we don't talk about it. We just avoid room 6 when we can, and we try not to think about it too much." That's insane. Maybe, but what's the alternative? Close the room? Have it exercised? How do you explain that to administration? She shook her head. "This is a hospital, Jake. People die here. Sometimes I think a few of them don't quite leave." I stared at the empty room, at the frost message that was already fading from the bed rails. Not just me. "How many?" I asked quietly. "How many have died in there?" "I don't know. Dozens probably, over the years." Linda put her hand on my shoulder. "Go home when your shift ends. Get some sleep. Think about whether you can come back tomorrow night. No one would blame you if you couldn't." But I did come back, and the night after that, and the night after that, I kept working at St. Catherine's for another 6 weeks. I took care of patients in room 6 a dozen more times. Sometimes nothing happened. Sometimes the equipment would malfunction in ways that made no sense. Sometimes patients would report seeing things they shouldn't be able to see. One elderly woman told me about the sad nurse who held her hand when she was scared at night. When I asked her to describe the nurse, she gave me details that matched the description of Sarah Mitchell, the nurse who'd been working when Thomas Brennan died, the nurse who, I later learned, had been killed in a car accident 3 months after Thomas's death. A young man recovering from a motorcycle accident told me he kept hearing children's voices singing in the middle of the night. I pulled the hospital records. Room 6 had been part of the pediatric ward back in the 1970s before the ICU expansion. The evidence kept piling up. Too much to be coincidence. Too consistent to be mass hallucination. I started having nightmares. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, certain I could hear heart monitors flatlining, certain I could feel that bone-deep cold seeping into my bedroom. I stopped sleeping well. I stopped eating well. I snapped at colleagues, made stupid mistakes with medication calculations, nearly gave a patient the wrong dosage of insulin before another nurse caught it. I knew I was spiraling. I knew I couldn't keep working like this. On May 2nd, I submitted my resignation. 2 weeks' notice. I told them I was moving back to be closer to family. I told them I'd found a better opportunity. I told them anything but the truth. The truth was that I couldn't walk into room 6 anymore without feeling like I was drowning in other people's deaths. The truth was that I'd started seeing shapes in corners everywhere, not just in that room. The truth was that I'd learned something about the nature of death and dying that I didn't want to know, and I couldn't unknow it. David Foster made a full recovery, by the way. They never did figure out what caused his seizure. He and Janet sent me a thank you card 2 weeks after he was discharged. Inside he'd written, "Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing. Thomas wants you to know he's not angry. None of them are. They just want to be remembered." I still have that card. I keep it in a drawer in my apartment, next to my old St. Catherine's ID badge that I can't quite bring myself to throw away. I work in a different hospital now, in a different city. Daytime shift, oncology floor. No more night shifts, no more ICU. No more room 6. I'm good at my job again. I sleep through the night again, most nights anyway. But sometimes when I'm charting late in my shift and the floor gets quiet, I hear it. That distant sound of a cardiac monitor flatlining. That voice trying to say something I can't quite understand. And I feel that cold creeping up my spine. I'll look up and the hallway will be empty. The temperature will be normal. Everything will be fine. But I know what I heard. I know what I felt. And I know that St. Catherine's still has patients in room 6. Other nurses are working those shifts, checking those monitors, hearing those voices. Maybe they're rationalizing it away like I tried to do. Maybe they're learning to live with it like Linda did. Or maybe they're like me, and they'll eventually realize they can't keep working in a place where the boundary between life and death isn't as solid as it should be. I looked up St. Catherine's website last month. They were advertising for ICU positions, night shift, sign-on bonus. I wonder how many nurses they've lost to room 6 over the years. I wonder how many more they'll lose. I also looked up David Foster on social media. He's doing well, posting pictures of his grandkids, talking about his cardiac rehab progress, living his life. He never mentions what happened that night, neither does his wife. But 3 months ago, he posted something that made me stop scrolling. It was a photo of a memorial bench at Riverside Park in Springfield. The plaque read, "In memory of Thomas Allen Brennan, 1957 to 2023, gone too soon." David's caption was simple: "Some people should never be forgotten." The photo had 47 likes and a dozen comments about what a nice gesture it was, how kind David was to honor a stranger. But David and I both knew Thomas wasn't a stranger. Not really. I got a message 2 weeks ago from Linda. She still works at St. Catherine's, still runs the night shift with the same steady competence she always had. "Room 6 has been quiet lately," she wrote, "ever since David's bench dedication. I don't know if that means anything. I don't know if it's possible that Thomas finally felt seen, finally felt remembered, and that was enough. But I wanted you to know, in case you were still wondering, I was still wondering. I am still wondering." I think about Thomas Brennan sometimes lying in that bed, his heart stopping while the monitor displayed a lie. I think about the 15 minutes he spent dying alone because we were understaffed and overwhelmed and human. I think about how terrifying it must have been to slip away from consciousness, from life, and have no one notice. No one there to hold your hand or tell you it was going to be okay. I think about Sarah Mitchell, the nurse who tried to save him, who carried that failure with her until her own death 3 months later. I wonder if she found Thomas in room 6 after she died. I wonder if they're both still there, or if the memorial bench was enough to finally let them rest. I think about all the others, the children from the 1970s, the countless cardiac patients, the trauma cases, the DNRs who coded anyway. All the people who died in that room over the decades, alone or surrounded by strangers in scrubs, their last moments reduced to chart notes and time of death documentation. I think about how we treat death in hospitals, how we sanitize it, systematize it, reduce it to protocols and procedures. How we forget that every code we run, every time of death we call, every body we clean and tag is a person, a whole life, a whole story. Maybe that's what room 6 was trying to tell me. Maybe that's what Thomas wanted me to understand, that they were there, that they mattered, that they should be remembered as more than just patient ID numbers and brief obituaries. I don't know if I believe in ghosts. I don't know if I believe that consciousness can persist after death, that the dead can interact with the living, that a hospital room can somehow hold on to the energy of everyone who died within its walls. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. I know what David Foster told me, and I know he couldn't have known those things through any normal means. I know that the cardiac monitor in room 6 malfunctioned in the exact same way during 2 separate incidents, months apart, despite being tested and certified as fully functional. I know that the temperature dropped 40 degrees in a matter of seconds, and that frost formed on metal bed rails in the middle of March. I know that I heard a voice when no one was there. I know that I saw something in that corner that my brain still won't let me fully remember, and I know that I couldn't keep working there after that night. I know that something fundamental shifted in me, some certainty I'd always carried about the nature of reality and death and what happens when we die. Maybe Linda was right. Maybe acknowledging it, talking about it, trying to get anyone to believe you is impossible. Maybe the only way to survive in healthcare is to compartmentalize, to rationalize, to convince yourself that the impossible things you witness are just stress and exhaustion and pattern-seeking behavior. But I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't stand in room 6 and pretend I didn't know what had happened there. I couldn't hook patients up to that cardiac monitor and not think about Thomas's flatline, about Sarah's desperate attempts to save him, about all the others who died in that space. I couldn't be the kind of nurse who just does the job and doesn't ask questions and doesn't wonder about the things that don't make sense. So I left. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice, if I gave up too easily, if I should have stayed and tried to understand what was happening, tried to help somehow. Other times I'm certain I barely escaped with my sanity intact. Most of the time I try not to think about it at all. But on nights when I can't sleep, when the shadows in my bedroom feel too dark and the silence feels too heavy, I think about what David said. He says you're going to see more. I haven't seen more. Not yet. Not in my new hospital, on my safe daylight shift with my oncology patients who die slowly and expected deaths, surrounded by family and morphine and gentle music. But I wonder if that's because there's nothing to see or because I'm not working nights anymore. I wonder if the things that exist in room 6 at St. Catherine's exist in other hospitals too, in other rooms, on other shifts. I wonder if there are nurses and doctors and techs all over the country who've seen what I saw, felt what I felt, and made the same choice to stay silent because no one would believe them anyway. I wonder if death is messier and stranger and less final than we want to believe, and I wonder if Thomas Brennan and Sarah Mitchell and all the others are still in room 6, or if the memorial bench really did give them permission to finally leave. I hope they left. I hope they found whatever comes next. I hope they're at peace. But deep down, in the part of me that still wakes up at 3 a.m. sometimes and hears cardiac monitors flatlining, I'm not sure they are. Last week, I got a voicemail from an unknown number. I almost deleted it without listening. Probably spam, probably nothing. But something made me play it. It was static at first, then breathing, then very faintly, a voice. Male. Clear. Speaking words I couldn't quite make out. The same voice I heard in room 6. I deleted the voicemail immediately. I blocked the number. I told myself it was a wrong number, a glitch, a weird coincidence. But my hands were shaking when I did it, because I recognized something in that voice. Not the words, but the tone. The desperate need to be heard. The urgency of someone trying to communicate across a distance that shouldn't be crossable. I haven't told anyone about the voicemail. Not Linda, not my new colleagues, not my friends or family. Who would I tell? What would I say? So I carry it alone, this knowledge that something followed me out of St. Catherine's. This fear that David was right, that I'm going to see more, that whatever opened up for me in room 6 that night didn't close when I walked away. I still work in healthcare. I still take care of patients. I still believe in the science and the medicine and the protocols that save lives every day. But I also believe in the things I can't explain, the cold spots and the voices and the figures in corners, the patients who see things they shouldn't see, the equipment that fails in impossible ways. I believe that hospitals are thin places where the membrane between life and death wears thin from all the crossing back and forth. I believe that some people who die aren't ready to leave, aren't ready to let go, aren't ready to be forgotten. And I believe that once you've seen it, once you've really seen it, you can't unsee it. Room 6 changed me. Thomas Brennan changed me. That night changed me. I left St. Catherine's Medical Center 6 months ago, but I'm not sure St. Catherine's has left me. I keep David's card in my drawer. I keep my old badge there too, even though I should have turned it in. Sometimes I take them out and look at them, reminding myself that it really happened, that I didn't imagine it. The card is yellowing now, the ink's starting to fade. But Thomas's message is still clear. They just want to be remembered. So I'm remembering. I'm telling this story, even though I know how it sounds. Even though I know most people will think I'm crazy or lying or attention-seeking. I'm telling it because Thomas and Sarah and all the others deserve to be more than just names and old hospital records. Because the thin places deserve to be acknowledged. Because the things that happen in room 6 and rooms like it deserve to be witnessed, even if we can't explain them. I'm telling it because maybe somewhere there's another nurse who's seen what I've seen, who's felt what I've felt, who's been standing in an empty room, listening to a voice that shouldn't exist, watching frost form on bed rails in the middle of spring. And maybe that nurse needs to know they're not alone. They're not crazy. They're not imagining it. It's real. Whatever it is, it's real. Have you ever seen something you couldn't explain? Something that made you question everything you thought you knew about life and death and what lies between them? I'd like to hear your story. I'd like to know I'm not the only one carrying this weight. And if you work in healthcare, if you work nights, if you've ever felt something watching you from an empty corner or heard a voice when no one was there, maybe it's time we started talking about it. Because the silence doesn't protect us. It just leaves us isolated with our impossible knowledge, wondering if we're losing our minds. I'm not working at St. Catherine's anymore, but room 6 is still there, still taking patients, still bearing witness to the thin places where life and death overlap. If you want to hear more stories like this, the cases that don't make it into the medical journals, the moments that shatter our certainty about how the world works, let me know in the comments. Some stories never really end. They just find new witnesses, and maybe that's the point.